For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Motshabi Hoaeane. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner discusses the access to government and building democracy. Thank you for your time, Professor. In your column, you refer to the importance of access to government, in particular informal access to government. Do you think this is a bad development?
You know, my original response was to see it as undermining democracy. In the new parliament that was established in 1994, I was in parliament at the time, and we introduced procedures whereby the public could make representations to parliament, and this had not previously been the case. Parliamentary committees had been behind closed doors, and I understood that this was an important way in which people could give Parliament their views about what they thought should be legislated and what they had against legislation. But we found then that organizations like the Chamber of Commerce were much better resourced, and they were able to come to Cape Town, prepare very good inputs. COSATU as well were very effective at the time. But what I referred to in the article was the informal access that business had to government, that in some ways, instead of using the formal institutions of government, going through procedures like representations in writing, people were able to speak to the minister, speak to the president, things like that. And I mentioned this, I think, in particular with regard to the emerging black bourgeoisie, and I think with regard to big capital. But when one thinks about it more carefully, I think there's something inevitable about seeking informal access, and it's not necessarily improper, and it's not necessarily antagonistic to democracy. For example, when you are, as government, intending to promulgate regulations or to pass legislations which affect a particular industry, it is more likely to work satisfactorily if you have consulted formally and informally, if necessary, with people who work on the ground in the industry concerned or in the business concerned, or if it is a matter of fixing communities, in the communities concerned. In regard to the latter, I recall how when they rolled out water in villages for the first time, sometimes they put the water in places that had some sacred significance and were places where women were still not allowed to go according to the way some people interpreted the customs. And had they consulted, the women would have said, who had from before been fetching water from the river, they would have said that's not a good place to put it. So informal access is that may have been formal, may have been an informal consultation. So the question really is, on the side, do you want the country to run smoothly? Do you want the economy to run smoothly? And from capital's point of view, they want to be sure that the economy is run in a way that is safe for their investments. And if they speak to a minister, they may need to just ask one question instead of a formal application of one or other type. If they do this, that may make the difference between them speaking to their counterparts overseas and saying something negative and saying something positive. And it's very important for the South African government to do what it can to keep capital happy. Now, it can't do everything that capital would want, because capital may want slave wages, who knows. But they do need investment. They don't want an investment withdrawal. I mean, there is already what COSATU has called an investment strike, where South African capital does not invest a lot in the country. So I think we have to recognize that the ways of relating between government and capital can't always be formal.
Now, Professor, when you discuss the NUMSA initiative, you seem to be at pains to try to influence its direction. Why is this?
I've not myself had conversations with NUMSA, although I met Dinga Sikwebu, the education officer of NUMSA, at Wits the other day, and I know him from before. I think it's very important when the biggest union in the country, probably the biggest union in the history of Africa, with 340,000 members, when they do anything, it's important. Now, their idea of a united front can either influence democracy in a broad way, or it can influence democracy in a limited way, affecting the organized working class alone. Now, Sikwebu was at pains the other day to say that nothing has been finalized. There is no formal decision to set up a workers' party. And, we mustn't listen to sound bites. My position is that the idea of a united front must be encouraged. And when NUMSA says they want to see the Freedom Charter implemented in full, the Freedom Charter is a document that speaks not just to the working class, but to all people who suffer disadvantages of various sorts in South Africa of the past, and by implication South Africa of today. And I think it's very important that NUMSA, as such an important organization, takes some responsibility for the well-being of people who may not be organized within the working class. Now, at that same meeting, Mr. Sikwebu said that NUMSA was the only union in COSATU that had taken a decision to oppose the traditional courts bill, or maybe one of the only unions. And that is a very good example of NUMSA taking responsibility for people potentially suffering disadvantages and attacks on their democratic rights without being members of the organized working class. In taking sides on this issue, they indicated that they have a concern with the future of the country, with the future of democracy that goes beyond NUMSA and beyond organized workers. And I think it's very important that the conception of a united front should be seen not merely as an instrument to establish a workers' party, but as something broader. And there are indications in some of the statements of NUMSA that that may be feasible. And that's why I take it seriously, and I try to engage respectfully with a view to encouraging the direction of this united front in a way that will be broadly democratic and drawing people from a range of sectors.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner.